Cold October rain poured over the city as if it wanted to wash away every trace of a once glorious empire. On the 32nd floor of a glass office tower, Min stood silently in front of the window. Below him, thousands of cars crawled through the evening traffic, unaware that within a few hours, one of the city's fastest-rising entrepreneurs would officially go bankrupt. His phone vibrated for the 17th time. He didn't even need to look at the screen. It was the bank. He pressed the power button and silenced the call. 1 minute later, the phone lit up again. This time it was his chief financial officer. He rejected the call as well. 10 years earlier, Min had been nothing more than a young man with an old motorcycle, a tiny rented room, and less than $100 in savings. During the day, he delivered packages and worked as a salesman. At night, he taught himself marketing, business strategy, and finance through books and online courses. He believed that hard work alone could change his life, and for a while, it did. 3 years later, he opened his first retail store. 5 years after that, his company had expanded to more than 50 locations across the country. Business magazines called him a young visionary. Startup conferences invited him to speak. Social media celebrated him as proof that anyone could become successful with enough determination. To the public, Min looked unstoppable, but very few people knew the truth behind his success. Almost every new store had been built with borrowed money. Every advertising campaign was funded by bank loans. Every expansion relied on debt. With every new achievement, Min became more confident. Eventually, confidence turned into arrogance. He began believing something incredibly dangerous, that he could never fail. The conference room door slowly opened. 12 senior managers were already waiting inside. No one spoke. The silence was so heavy that even the sound of the air conditioner seemed unusually loud. Min placed a thick financial report on the table and looked at his finance director. "How much cash do we have left?" The finance director lowered his head before answering. 3.2 billion Vietnamese dong. Min nodded calmly. "And our total debt?" The man hesitated for a moment. 238 billion. The room fell completely silent. One of the managers quietly wiped away tears. No one dared to make eye contact. Min remained surprisingly calm. What if the bank approves the next loan today? The finance director slowly shook his head. "They won't." "Why? They've already sent the notice." He handed Min a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sentence. "Your credit facility has been suspended due to increased financial risk." Everything changed in that instant. The company wasn't failing because sales were weak. Customers still loved the products. Revenue remained strong. On paper, the business looked healthy. The real problem was cash flow. The company generated millions of dollars in annual revenue, yet there was almost no cash available. Customers paid 60 days after buying. Suppliers demanded payment within 30 days. The bank collected interest exactly on schedule. One small disruption was enough to destroy the entire system. 3 days later, the news spread across the internet. Rising entrepreneur faces bankruptcy. The same media outlets that once praised Min were now analyzing every mistake he had ever made. Former supporters became critics overnight. People who had once lined up to take photos with him now posted comments like, "I knew this would happen. He built everything with debt." Another fake businessman. Success had many friends. Failure stood alone. That evening, Min drove his black Mercedes S-Class home for what might be the last time. The luxury car that once symbolized victory had become another asset the bank would soon repossess. He unlocked the front door. The lights were on. His wife, Lan, was sitting quietly in the living room. A suitcase rested beside her. Without saying a word, Min already understood something was terribly wrong. 2 weeks later, the bank auctioned his house. He watched strangers walk through the living room where his daughter had taken her first steps. They inspected the kitchen, measured the bedrooms, negotiated the price. To them, it was simply another property. To Min, it was the place where every family memory lived. When the auction ended, Min packed the few belongings he still owned into 4 cardboard boxes. Some clothes, a few books, family photographs, his father's old wristwatch. Everything else was gone. That night, he rented a tiny apartment on the edge of the city. The room was barely large enough for a single bed, a small desk, and an old wooden chair. 10 years earlier, he had dreamed of escaping a place like this. Now, life had brought him back. Except this time, he carried something much heavier than poverty. He carried regret. Min opened his wallet. Inside were a few banknotes and a single debit card that no longer worked. He checked his bank account. After legal deductions, debt repayments, and frozen assets. His remaining balance was just $500. 10 years of building, 10 years of sacrificing, 10 years of chasing success, reduced to $500. He sat by the window until sunrise, staring at the city that once admired him. For the first time in his life, Min asked himself a question that no business school had ever taught him. If money can disappear this quickly, what is real wealth? That single question would change the rest of his life. 3 weeks after losing everything, Min had stopped answering unknown phone numbers. Every call sounded the same: debt collectors, former suppliers, law firms, people demanding money he simply didn't have. Eventually, silence became more comforting than conversation. His new apartment was barely 300 square feet. The paint was peeling from the walls. The old ceiling fan rattled every night. Outside the window, trains passed every few hours, shaking the entire building. It was nothing like the luxurious home he once owned. Yet for the first time in years, Min slept without worrying about tomorrow's board meeting. Every morning, he woke up at 6, not because he had somewhere to be, but because his body had spent the last decade following the same routine. He would make instant coffee, sit beside the window, and stare at the city that had once celebrated him. Now, it barely remembered his name. One morning, while scrolling through financial news, Min saw another entrepreneur featured on the front page. The headline read, "Young CEO builds billion-dollar company in just 5 years." He smiled bitterly. 5 years earlier, that headline could have been about him. Now he understood something the public rarely saw. Success made headlines. Failure taught lessons. His phone buzzed. It was a message from an old business friend. "I'm sorry about everything. I wish I could help, but investors don't want to be associated with someone who's bankrupt." Min didn't reply. He wasn't angry. He simply realized that many people had loved his success. Not him. Days turned into weeks. His savings continued to disappear. Rent, food, utilities. Every dollar mattered. For the first time since becoming wealthy, Min compared supermarket prices before buying groceries. He walked instead of taking taxis. He stopped drinking expensive coffee. He learned that a simple meal could be enough. Ironically, he had never felt more aware of the value of money. One rainy afternoon, Min opened an old cardboard box he had carried from his former house. Inside were dozens of notebooks from the early years of his business. Handwritten ideas, sales records, marketing experiments, customer feedback. Every page reminded him of a younger version of himself, a man driven by curiosity instead of ego. One notebook caught his attention. On the first page, he had written a sentence nearly 10 years earlier. "Never borrow money to protect your pride." Min stared at the words for a long time. He laughed quietly. He had written the advice, then spent years ignoring it. That evening, unable to stop thinking, he walked through the city without any destination. The streets were crowded with people rushing home from work. Nobody recognized him. Nobody asked for selfies. Nobody cared who he had once been. Oddly enough, the feeling was liberating. He was no longer living to impress anyone. As the rain grew heavier, Min stepped into a small second-hand bookstore to stay dry. The shop was quiet. Dust covered the wooden shelves. Only one elderly man sat behind the counter, reading a thick book. Without looking up, the old man said, "Looking for something?" Min smiled politely. "I don't know." The old man finally raised his eyes. Most people who walk into a bookstore without knowing what they want are actually searching for answers. Min wandered through the finance section. One worn-out book slipped from the shelf and landed at his feet. Its title read, "Cash Flow is King." The cover was faded. Several pages had been highlighted by a previous owner. He opened it randomly. A single sentence immediately caught his attention. "Revenue is vanity. Profit is opinion. Cash flow is reality." He froze. Those words described his entire life. Interesting book, isn't it? The old man had quietly walked over. Min nodded. "I wish I had read it 10 years ago." The old man smiled. "No, you probably did. You just weren't ready to understand it?" Those words hit Min harder than any financial report ever had. Knowledge had never been his problem. His ego had been. He thought making more money could solve every problem. Instead, it had blinded him to the risks growing beneath the surface. Min bought the book with the last $20 in his wallet. As he reached the door, the old man called after him. "Young man." Min turned around. "Come back tomorrow. I think we should have a conversation." "About business?" Min asked. The old man smiled. "No, about money. And they're not the same thing." For the first time since losing everything, Min felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not because he had found a miracle, but because someone had offered him wisdom instead of pity. Little did he know ... that quiet old bookstore would become the place where his second life truly began. The next morning, Min arrived at the bookstore 15 minutes early. The streets were still wet from last night's rain. The old wooden sign above the entrance creaked gently in the morning breeze. He hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door. The familiar scent of old books immediately filled the air. The elderly man was already there. He sat quietly in the same chair, reading another worn-out book. Without looking up, he said, "I knew you would come." Min smiled. "How?" The old man closed his book. "Because people who have truly lost everything don't look for comfort. They look for answers. My name is David," the old man said as he extended his hand. "I retired many years ago." "Were you a teacher?" Min asked. David smiled. "No. I spent 40 years buying companies." Min looked surprised. "You were an investor." "I still am. I simply stopped chasing bigger deals." They walked to a small table near the window. David placed the cups of black coffee on the table. No sugar. No milk. The taste of coffee should never be hidden. Min laughed. "I've never heard anyone compare coffee to business." David smiled. "They're more alike than you think." David leaned forward. "Tell me, how did you lose everything?" Min took a deep breath. "I expanded too quickly. I borrowed too much. The bank stopped lending. My cash flow disappeared." David nodded. "That's what happened." "I'm asking why it happened." Min remained silent. For the first time, he realized those were two completely different questions. After several minutes, he finally answered. "I wanted my company to become the biggest." David shook his head. "No, that was the result." "What did you really want?" Min looked down. "I wanted people to admire me." David smiled gently. "There it is, the real answer. You weren't building a business. You were building an image." Those words struck harder than any criticism Min had ever received, because they were true. He remembered buying expensive watches before the company was profitable. He remembered upgrading to luxury cars while the business was still borrowing money. He remembered accepting interviews simply because he enjoyed hearing people call him successful. His company had slowly become a machine designed to impress others, not to create lasting value. David picked up a napkin and drew 3 circles. In the first circle he wrote, "Income." In the second, "Assets." In the third, "Cash flow." Most people believe income makes them rich. They're wrong. They believe expensive assets make them wealthy. They're wrong again. He tapped the third circle, cash flow. This is what keeps businesses alive. This is what feeds families. This is what survives recessions. Min stared at the drawing. It looks so simple. David nodded. It is. People just prefer complicated answers. David continued. When your company earned millions, where did the money go? New stores, advertising, office renovations, luxury headquarters. David smiled. And did any of those investments create cash immediately? Min slowly shook his head. No. David leaned back. You didn't own your business. Your bank owned it. The moment they stopped believing in you. Double quotes. They took everything back. Min lowered his head. For years he had blamed the economy, the banks, his competitors, the market. Now, for the first time, he blamed the right person, himself. David noticed the change. Good. Guilt isn't useful, but responsibility is. If your decisions created the disaster. Double quotes. Your decisions can also create the comeback. The old investor reached into his leather bag and placed a blank notebook on the table. I want you to do something. For the next 30 days. You are forbidden to think about becoming rich. Min looked confused. Then what should I think about? David smiled. Learning. I want you to write down every financial mistake you've ever made. Every loan, every emotional decision, every purchase that was made to impress someone, every opportunity you ignored. Min slowly opened the notebook. The first page was blank. It reminded him of his life. Painful, empty, but full of possibility. As he picked up the pen, David said one final sentence before standing up. The first fortune you built was made with ambition. The second one. Double quotes. Will be built with wisdom. Min began writing. For the first time in years, he wasn't making a business plan. He wasn't chasing investors. He wasn't looking for the next opportunity. He was studying the person who had destroyed his first fortune, because he finally understood one powerful truth. Before rebuilding a business. You must rebuild the person running it. 30 days passed faster than Min had expected. Every morning, he arrived at the bookstore before sunrise. Every afternoon, he filled another page of the notebook David had given him. He didn't write business plans. He wrote mistakes, every bad investment, every emotional decision, every warning sign he had ignored. For the first time in his life, he wasn't studying the market, he was studying himself. On the 31st day, David closed the notebook and nodded. Good. Min looked up. Am I ready now? David smiled. No. You've only learned why you failed. You still haven't learned how to build wealth. David reached into his bag and placed a single $1 bill on the table. Min looked confused. What does this mean? David pushed the bill toward him. This is your first investment. Min frowned. It's only $1. David smiled. Exactly? Never disrespect a small amount of money. The person who wastes $1 will eventually waste 1 million. Min turned the bill over in his hand. Years earlier, he wouldn't have bothered picking it up if it had fallen onto the street. Now it suddenly felt valuable, not because of its purchasing power, but because of what it represented. A new beginning. David leaned forward. I have one assignment for you. For the next 90 days. Double quotes. You may not borrow money. You may not ask investors for capital. You may not use credit. You must build income using only your skills. Min thought for a moment, but I don't have a business anymore. David smiled. You still have experience. And experience has value. That afternoon, Min returned to his apartment and opened his old laptop. The machine was slow. The battery barely held a charge. It was the only computer he still owned. He stared at the blank screen for nearly an hour. Then he typed for simple words, Business Growth Consultant. He created a small profile online. There were no professional photos, no expensive office, no luxury lifestyle, only one sentence. I help small businesses improve cash flow and avoid the mistakes that destroyed my own company. He hesitated before pressing the publish button, then he clicked it. For 3 days nothing happened. No emails, no phone calls, no clients. Every few hours, Min refreshed the page. Still nothing. He began wondering whether David's advice had been wrong. On the 4th day, an email finally arrived. A local bakery owner wanted a 1-hour consultation. The payment, $50. Years earlier, Min wouldn't have stood up from his chair for $50. Now his hands trembled as he read the message. The meeting took place in a small family-owned bakery. The owner looked nervous. "My sales are good," she said. "But somehow there's never enough money." Min smiled. "I've heard that story before. For years it was my own." Instead of giving complicated advice, Min asked simple questions. When do your customers pay? When do your suppliers expect payment? How much inventory sits on your shelves? Which products actually make money? Within 30 minutes, he discovered 3 major cash flow problems the owner had never noticed. 2 weeks later, she called him again. "This is unbelievable. We finally have money left at the end of the month. Our profits didn't increase, but somehow We're no longer struggling," Min smiled. "Because profit isn't the same as cash." Word spread quietly. 1 bakery became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became 12. Min never advertised. His clients recommended him because his advice worked. For the first time, his reputation wasn't built on expensive marketing. It was built on results. 3 months later, Min reviewed his finances. His income wasn't spectacular. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous, but something had changed. Every dollar he earned belonged to him. No bank loans. No investors. No borrowed money. No sleepless nights worrying about debt. That evening, Min returned to the bookstore. David was waiting. Without saying a word, Min placed an envelope on the table. Inside was the same $1 bill, along with 99 more, exactly $100. David smiled. "You kept your promise," Min nodded. "I earned every dollar." David looked at him carefully. "How do you feel?" Min thought for a moment. "When I earned my first million double quotes, I felt powerful. When I earned this $100 I felt peaceful." David laughed softly. "Now you're beginning to understand. Money doesn't create freedom. Cash flow creates freedom, and wisdom protects it." As the sun began to set outside the bookstore window, David pulled another notebook from his leather bag. This one was much thicker than the first. He placed it in front of Min. The first notebook was about failure. This one is about building an empire that can never be destroyed. Min slowly opened the first page. At the top, written in elegant handwriting, were 7 words. Own assets. Never chase appearances again. Min smiled. For the first time since losing everything, he no longer dreamed of becoming rich. He dreamed of becoming financially free. And deep inside, he knew his second journey had only just begun. 10 years had passed since the day Min walked out of his bankrupt company carrying nothing but a cardboard box. The city had changed. New skyscrapers stood where old buildings once were. Businesses had risen and fallen. Markets had boomed and crashed. But one thing remained the same. People still believed wealth was something they could see. Min knew better. His second company looked nothing like the first. There was no luxurious headquarters. No fleet of expensive cars. No oversized executive offices. Most meetings were held online. His team worked remotely from different countries. Every expense had a purpose. Every investment generated cash flow before it generated prestige. The business was smaller than his first empire, yet it earned far more profit. This time, Min owned the company. The company didn't own him. He slept 8 hours every night. He had dinner with his family. He attended every one of his daughter's school performances. Years earlier, He believed success required sacrificing everything. Now he understood that success without balance was simply another form of failure. His investment portfolio had also changed. Instead of chasing risky opportunities, he quietly accumulated assets: dividend-paying stocks, commercial real estate, small private businesses with strong cash flow, renewable energy projects. Each investment produced income month after month. Money worked while he rested. That was real freedom. One afternoon, Min received an invitation to speak at the same entrepreneurship conference where he had once been celebrated as a rising star. 10 years earlier, he had walked onto that stage wearing an expensive Italian suit and a luxury watch. This time, he arrived wearing a simple navy blazer and an inexpensive watch his father had given him years ago. No one noticed the watch, and he preferred it that way. The auditorium was filled with young entrepreneurs eager to learn the secret of becoming rich. The host smiled. "Mr. Min, everyone knows about your incredible comeback. If you had to give one piece of advice to future entrepreneurs, what would it be?" Min paused for a moment before answering. "I won't tell you how to make money." The audience looked surprised. "I'll tell you how not to lose it." He walked slowly across the stage. "When I was young, I thought revenue meant success. I was wrong. I thought owning luxury cars meant wealth. I was wrong. I thought borrowing money to grow faster made me smarter. I was wrong again." The room became completely silent. The biggest mistake I ever made wasn't borrowing too much. It wasn't expanding too quickly. It wasn't trusting the wrong people. He looked across the audience. "The biggest mistake I ever made ... was believing that looking rich was the same as being rich." Several people quietly wrote down every word. Min continued. "If your lifestyle grows faster than your assets ... double quotes, you are becoming poorer. If your debt grows faster than your cash flow ... double quotes, you are becoming weaker. If your ego grows faster than your wisdom ... double quotes, you are already walking toward failure." After the speech ended, hundreds of people lined up to shake his hand. One young man stepped forward. He looked nervous. "Mr. Min ... I'm 26. My startup just failed. I've lost almost everything. What should I do?" Min smiled. He saw his younger self standing before him. He reached into his wallet and removed a single $1 bill. The same lesson David had once given him. He placed it in the young man's hand. "Keep this." The young man looked confused. "It's only $1. Min smiled. "I know. So was mine." The young man looked at him, waiting for an explanation. Min said softly, "Respect small money. Respect small opportunities. Respect small beginnings. The people who learn to grow $1 with discipline ... double quotes, ... are the same people who can protect 1 million. That evening, Min drove home. Not in a luxury sedan, not in a sports car, just a comfortable family SUV ... His daughter opened the front door before he could ring the bell. "Dad." She hugged him tightly. His wife, Lan, smiled from the kitchen. Dinner was already on the table. Years ago, he had spent millions trying to buy happiness. Now he understood that happiness had never been for sale. Years later, business magazines would once again call Min one of the country's wealthiest entrepreneurs. But this time, he never cared about the headlines. He no longer chased recognition, he chased purpose. Whenever someone asked him how he rebuilt his fortune, he always smiled and gave the same answer. "I didn't rebuild my fortune first. I rebuilt myself, and once I changed ... everything else followed." A week later, Min visited the old bookstore. The building looked exactly the same. Dusty shelves, wooden floors, the familiar smell of old paper. But David's favorite chair was empty. The store owner quietly walked over. "He passed away last winter." Min lowered his head. For several minutes, he said nothing. The owner handed him a small envelope. "He asked me to give you this." The end. Final lesson: losing money is a financial problem. Losing character is a life problem. If you protect your character, your knowledge, and your discipline double quotes, you can always earn money again. But if you lose those three no amount of money will ever make you truly wealthy. Inside was a handwritten letter. It contained only a few lines. If you're reading this, it means you no longer need a teacher. Remember money is a wonderful servant but a terrible master. Now it's your turn to teach someone else. Min folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket. He walked outside and looked at the city skyline. Once, those buildings had represented success. Now they simply reminded him of how temporary success could be. Real wealth wasn't stored inside office towers. It lived inside discipline, wisdom, patience, and character.